England, 1874. The child was 6 weeks old when Sir Edward Ashcombe stepped off the train at Paddington Station after nearly 3 years of service in British India. Steam drifted beneath the iron arches above the platform, while porters hurried between arriving passengers, carrying trunks and military luggage through the noise of a city that seemed entirely unaware that one man's life was about to change forever. Edward had spent months imagining this moment. During long evenings in Calcutta, he had pictured the familiar streets of London, the comfort of his own home, and above all the sight of his wife waiting for him at the station. What he had never imagined was seeing her standing there with an infant in her arms. At first he thought he had misunderstood what he was looking at. The distance between them was considerable, and the platform was crowded with travelers reuniting after long separations. Yet as Eleanor began walking toward him, the reality became impossible to ignore. The small bundle pressed against her chest moved beneath the blanket, and a tiny hand emerged briefly before disappearing again beneath the folds of cloth. For several seconds, Edward remained motionless. The years he had spent in military service had trained him to remain calm under pressure, but nothing in India had prepared him for the sight of a child he did not know existed. Eleanor greeted him warmly and introduced the infant as their son. The explanation followed almost immediately, as though she had rehearsed it countless times before his arrival. The child, she said, had been born prematurely after a difficult pregnancy that had frightened both her family and her physicians. During the chaos that followed, letters had been delayed, several never reached their destination, and the details surrounding the birth had become lost amid months of uncertainty and fear. Edward listened carefully without interrupting her. On the surface, the story seemed plausible enough. Long-distance communication between Britain and India was notoriously unreliable, and countless letters disappeared during overseas transport every year. Yet something about her explanation felt strangely incomplete, as though an important piece of the story remained hidden beneath the words she was willing to speak aloud. By the time they reached Kensington later that afternoon, a quiet unease had already begun taking root in his mind. The Ashcombe family occupied a respected position within London society. Edward's military career had earned admiration among both government officials and fellow officers, while Eleanor's beauty and charm had made her a welcome guest in drawing rooms throughout the city. Under normal circumstances, the arrival of a healthy heir would have been celebrated as wonderful news. Instead, it became the beginning of a rumor. Within days, neighbors began discussing the matter behind closed doors. Some remembered precisely when Edward had departed for India. Others remembered how long he had remained overseas. A few possessed an unfortunate talent for comparing dates and drawing conclusions from details that respectable society preferred not to discuss openly. Nobody accused Eleanor of anything directly. Victorian England rarely worked that way. Suspicion traveled through whispers, raised eyebrows, unfinished conversations, and carefully chosen silences that often proved more damaging than spoken accusations. Edward noticed the change almost immediately. Guests who had once spoken freely now seemed cautious in his presence. Conversations occasionally stopped when he entered a room, only to resume after an uncomfortable pause. Several men avoided discussing the child altogether, while others appeared almost too eager to congratulate him. The behavior was subtle but impossible to miss. As the weeks passed, he found himself studying his wife more closely than ever before. Eleanor remained affectionate, attentive, and devoted to both her husband and the infant. Yet beneath her calm exterior, he occasionally glimpsed something unexpected. It appeared only for brief moments, usually when she believed herself unobserved, but once seen it could not be forgotten. She looked afraid, not like a woman carrying a secret romance, not like a woman overwhelmed by motherhood. She looked like someone waiting for an unavoidable disaster. The answer arrived sooner than either of them expected. Several weeks after his return, Edward received a formal letter from Dr. Thomas Whitmore, the physician who had supervised much of Eleanor's pregnancy. The message was polite and professional, offering no indication of urgency, yet the request for a private meeting carried an unmistakable weight. Curiosity alone would have been enough to secure Edward's attendance. What he discovered there would change everything. Inside the physician's Harley Street office, Whitmore appeared deeply uncomfortable from the moment the conversation began. After several minutes of careful explanation, he revealed that Eleanor's case had recently become the subject of discussion among several medical colleagues. Certain records from her examinations had attracted attention, and those records raised questions that could no longer be ignored. The doctor then placed several documents on his desk. They contained dates, observations, measurements, and notes recorded throughout the pregnancy. Individually, none seemed remarkable. Together, however, they told a story that differed dramatically from the one Eleanor had shared with her husband. According to the medical records, the pregnancy had progressed much further than she claimed, far enough to create a devastating problem. Edward examined the dates repeatedly, hoping he had misunderstood something. Yet every calculation led to the same conclusion. If the physicians were correct, conception could not have occurred before his departure for India. It would have happened while he was already thousands of miles away. Whitmore offered no accusations and made no moral judgments. As a physician, his responsibility extended only to facts, and the facts were becoming increasingly difficult to explain. When Edward finally left the office, London's streets appeared exactly as they had that morning. Carriages moved through the traffic, shopkeepers greeted customers, and ordinary life continued uninterrupted around him. Yet the certainty he had carried home from India was gone. For the first time, the whispers spreading through London's drawing rooms no longer sounded like idle gossip. They sounded like the beginning of a scandal that could end in court. And somewhere beyond the walls of his home, another man might already know why. The days following Edward's meeting with Dr. Whitmore unfolded beneath a cloud of uncertainty that seemed to settle over every corner of the Ashcombe household. For nearly 3 years, Edward had imagined returning to England as the conclusion of a long chapter in his life. His military service in India had demanded patience, discipline, and endurance. But it had also given him a clear purpose. Every difficult season overseas had been accompanied by the belief that one day he would return to the life he had left behind. Instead, he returned to questions. Questions that followed him through every room of his own home. Questions that greeted him at breakfast and lingered long after midnight. Questions that no one seemed willing to answer directly. The greatest cruelty was that nothing appeared visibly wrong. The nursery remained peaceful. The servants performed their duties as usual. Eleanor continued to move through society with the grace and composure expected of a respectable Victorian wife. To an outsider, the Ashcombes looked like a family blessed by good fortune. Only Edward knew how fragile that image had become. The physician's records remained locked inside his study desk, yet he found himself returning to them almost every evening. He would spread the documents across the leather surface, examine the dates again, and search for some overlooked detail that might restore order to the situation. The result was always the same. The calculations did not support Eleanor's explanation. No matter how many times he reviewed the records, the timeline remained deeply troubling. Victorian medicine was far from perfect, but by the 1870s, physicians had become increasingly confident in their ability to estimate the progression of pregnancy. The conclusions reached by Dr. Whitmore were not based upon guesswork alone. They reflected repeated examinations recorded over many months, observations that had been documented long before anyone imagined the legitimacy of the child might one day be questioned. That fact troubled Edward more than anything else. The records had not been created for a court case. They had been created for medical purposes, which made them difficult to dismiss. Yet every time he looked at the infant sleeping peacefully in the nursery, doubt returned. The child seemed so innocent, so completely unaware of the storm gathering around him. Edward had never been a cruel man. He found no satisfaction in imagining scandal, no satisfaction in imagining betrayal. Part of him desperately wanted Eleanor's story to be true. Part of him wanted the physicians to be mistaken. The alternative threatened to destroy everything they had built together. As the weeks passed, he began paying closer attention to events that had occurred during his absence. The process started innocently enough. He reviewed old correspondence, family letters, household accounts, invitations, guest lists, records that most husbands would never examine twice. At first, the material appeared entirely ordinary. Eleanor had attended charitable functions, musical evenings, church gatherings, and social events that occupied much of respectable London's calendar. Her activities reflected exactly what society expected from the wife of a military officer stationed abroad. Then Edward noticed something curious. One name appeared with unusual frequency: Julian Hawthorne. The connection itself was not suspicious. Julian had known both Edward and Eleanor for years. He belonged to the same social circles and maintained friendships with dozens of families throughout London. His presence at social functions was hardly remarkable. Yet the pattern became difficult to ignore. Whenever Edward encountered references to major events from the previous year, Julian's name often appeared nearby. a charity auction, a spring garden party, a dinner hosted by a member of Parliament, a concert at St. James's Hall. Again and again, both names appeared on the same guest lists. The discovery might have meant nothing. Victorian society was small at the highest levels, and the same individuals frequently attended the same gatherings. Still, Edward could not shake the feeling that something lay beneath the surface. One evening, he decided to speak with Eleanor directly. The conversation took place in the drawing room after dinner. A fire burned quietly in the hearth while rain tapped against the windows overlooking the street. For several minutes, they discussed ordinary matters before Edward finally placed Dr. Whitmore's records on the table between them. The effect was immediate. Eleanor's expression changed before she spoke a single word. Not dramatically, not enough for a stranger to notice. Yet after years of marriage, Edward recognized the reaction instantly. She had expected this moment. Perhaps not that evening, perhaps not that week, but she had known it was coming. The realization settled heavily between them. Edward asked her to explain the discrepancy. Eleanor listened carefully before responding. Her voice remained calm at first. She argued that the physicians had made assumptions based upon incomplete information and insisted that the child had arrived far earlier than expected. Pregnancy, she reminded him, did not always follow precise calculations, and doctors frequently disagreed about matters that seemed certain in retrospect. The explanation sounded reasonable, yet something about it felt rehearsed, as though she had repeated the same argument many times in her own mind. Edward continued asking questions. Why had she never mentioned concerns about the dates in her letters? Why had she not shown him the medical records herself? Why had the issue reached a physician before it reached her husband? Each question seemed to make her more uncomfortable. For the first time since his return from India, the confidence she usually displayed began to crack. Tears gathered in her eyes. She admitted that she had been terrified of gossip, terrified of misunderstanding, terrified that a complicated pregnancy would become a source of public speculation. Yet despite her fear, she never abandoned her central claim. Throughout the conversation, she insisted that she had remained faithful during Edward's absence, and that every accusation now forming around the family was built upon incorrect assumptions rather than fact. The discussion continued late into the evening. When it finally ended, neither had convinced the other. Edward remained troubled by the evidence. Eleanor remained trapped behind her own version of events, and the distance growing between them felt larger than the thousands of miles that had once separated England from India. Meanwhile, London society had begun reaching its own conclusions. Rumors moved quickly through drawing rooms, private clubs, and dinner parties where the Ashcombe name carried enough significance to attract attention. Few people possessed direct knowledge of the situation, but that rarely prevented speculation. If anything, ignorance often encouraged it. A military officer returning from overseas, a child whose birth raised questions, a respected young wife surrounded by whispers. The ingredients were irresistible. The story spread gradually at first, then with increasing speed. No newspapers mentioned the family directly, not yet. Nevertheless, people talked. Servants carried fragments of conversations from one household to another. Guests repeated observations they barely understood. Small details became larger with every retelling, until half the city seemed to possess an opinion regarding events that remained hidden from public view. The pressure became impossible to ignore. Then another complication emerged. Dr. Whitmore's conclusions were quietly reviewed by two additional physicians. Neither doctor knew the Ashcombes personally. Neither had any obvious reason to favor one side. Both examined the records independently. Both reached essentially the same conclusion. The child did not appear to have been born unusually early. If their calculations were correct, conception had occurred while Edward remained in India. The medical opinions transformed suspicion into something far more dangerous. What had once been whispered in private circles now carried the weight of professional testimony. For the first time, legal action became a realistic possibility. Edward sought advice from his solicitor, expecting caution. Instead, the lawyer spoke with surprising certainty. Questions involving inheritance, legitimacy, and family estates could not remain unresolved indefinitely. If Edward intended to challenge the child's legal status, delaying the matter would only complicate future proceedings. The recommendation forced him into a decision he had hoped to avoid. For several days, he struggled with it. Bringing the matter before a court would expose Eleanor to public scrutiny, unlike anything she had ever experienced. Every private detail of their marriage would become material for examination. Physicians, servants, acquaintances, and social rivals would all be invited to offer testimony. The consequences would be humiliating regardless of the outcome. Yet doing nothing carried its own risks. If the child truly belonged to another man, silence would allow the deception to become permanent. The future of the Ashcombe family would rest upon a lie. Late one evening, after hours spent alone in his study, Edward finally reached a conclusion. The decision brought no relief, only resignation. The following morning, formal instructions were delivered to his solicitor. Within days, legal notices began circulating among the parties involved. For the first time, the whispers spreading across London acquired official significance. The matter would no longer be settled through gossip, assumptions, or private arguments behind closed doors. A court would examine the evidence, physicians would testify, dates would be calculated, and before the proceedings ended, one of the most respected families in London would discover whether a child had been born into a marriage or into a scandal. By the spring of 1875, the Ashcombe affair had become one of the most discussed legal disputes in London. What had begun as private doubts inside a marriage was now moving steadily toward a public courtroom, where reputation carried almost as much weight as evidence, and where a single accusation could permanently alter a family's place in society. For Eleanor, the transformation was devastating. Only a few months earlier, she had been welcomed into drawing rooms throughout the city. Invitations arrived regularly, acquaintances greeted her warmly, and her position within respectable society seemed secure. Now, everything had changed. Some invitations quietly stopped arriving. Certain women who had once called her a friend suddenly found reasons to avoid her. Conversations often ended when she entered a room. Nobody openly insulted her. Victorian society rarely operated so directly. Instead, it punished through distance, through silence, through exclusion. The effect was often far more painful. Eleanor understood exactly what was happening. She also understood that the worst was still ahead. The trial had not even begun. Meanwhile, Edward found himself trapped between two conflicting instincts. One urged him to continue pursuing the truth regardless of where it led. The other reminded him that every step forward pushed the mother of his child, or the child he had believed was his, deeper into public humiliation. There were moments when he considered abandoning the case altogether. Those moments usually occurred in the nursery. The infant remained completely unaware of the conflicts surrounding him. He laughed. He slept. He reached for familiar faces with small hands that knew nothing of inheritance laws or medical testimony. Sometimes Edward would stand beside the cradle and wonder whether the truth mattered as much as everyone claimed. Then he would return to the evidence, and the questions would return with it. The legal preparations moved forward relentlessly. Solicitors collected correspondence. Servants were interviewed. Medical records were copied and reviewed. Witness lists grew longer each week. As the date of the hearing approached, one name continued appearing throughout the investigation: Julian Hawthorne. At first, the references remained indirect. Several witnesses recalled seeing him escort Eleanor to public events while Edward served overseas. Others remembered lengthy conversations between them during social gatherings. A housemaid testified that Mr. Hawthorne had visited the Ashcombe residence on numerous occasions, often staying considerably longer than other callers. Individually, none of these details proved anything. Together, they created a pattern. And patterns were exactly what lawyers like to present before judges. Julian responded to the growing scrutiny with remarkable composure. He continued attending social events. He continued managing his estates. Publicly, he appeared almost untouched by the controversy. Privately, however, rumors suggested a different reality. Several acquaintances claimed he had become increasingly withdrawn. Others reported that he had begun declining invitations he once accepted eagerly. One gentleman even remarked that Hawthorne looked as though he had aged several years during a single winter. Whether the observations were accurate or merely products of gossip, nobody could say. What mattered was perception, and perception was turning against him. The first courtroom hearing attracted enormous attention. Long before proceedings began, spectators crowded the area outside the courthouse. Journalists gathered near the entrance, hoping to catch a glimpse of the individuals whose names had circulated through London for months. The scandal contained everything the public found irresistible: marriage, betrayal, inheritance, medicine. And beneath it all, the question of a child's true father. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt considerably less dramatic than newspaper readers might have expected. The room was orderly, formal, controlled. Yet beneath that surface lay enormous tension. Edward sat beside his legal representatives. Across the room sat Eleanor. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Neither looked away immediately. Neither appeared angry. What passed between them felt far more complicated. There had been a time when they trusted each other completely. A time before India, before rumors, before physicians began counting months and calculating dates. That life now seemed impossibly distant. The proceedings began with medical testimony. Dr. Whitmore was among the first witnesses called. His reputation was strong, his records detailed, and his manner cautious. The physician spoke carefully, avoiding exaggeration or speculation. He explained the observations made during Eleanor's pregnancy and described the examinations conducted throughout the previous year. Then came the central issue, the timeline. Several documents were presented to the court, dates were reviewed, notes were examined. The process lacked the excitement many spectators expected, yet it proved deeply damaging for Eleanor's defense. Because the records had been created long before litigation began, they carried substantial credibility. Whitmore repeatedly emphasized that his conclusions were based on medical observations rather than personal opinions. According to those observations, the child appeared to have developed normally throughout the pregnancy. Nothing suggested an unusually premature birth. The implication was obvious, even when left unspoken. The defense responded aggressively. Their lawyers questioned the reliability of Victorian medicine and highlighted examples of pregnancies that had failed to follow expected patterns. They argued that physicians frequently disagreed with one another, and that estimating conception dates remained far from an exact science. The arguments possessed merit. Medical certainty in the 19th century had limits. Everyone in the courtroom understood that. Yet uncertainty alone could not erase the records already presented. The testimony continued for hours. When proceedings finally ended that afternoon, newspapers rushed to publish summaries before evening editions reached the streets. The next morning, London awoke to headlines discussing medical evidence, disputed timelines, and the increasingly fragile position of Lady Eleanor Ashcombe. For the first time, the scandal belonged not only to those involved, it belonged to the public. Days later, the case took a more dangerous turn. A former servant came forward with information that immediately attracted attention from both legal teams. The woman had worked briefly within the Ashcombe household during Edward's absence. Most of her testimony concerned ordinary matters. Then she described something unusual. According to her account, she had once discovered a letter hidden inside a writing desk in Eleanor's private sitting room. She claimed she had not read the entire document, only enough to recognize that it came from a man who expressed affection, far exceeding ordinary friendship. The original letter was nowhere to be found. Its disappearance created immediate controversy. The defense argued that the servant's memory was unreliable and motivated by personal resentment. The prosecution insisted the testimony supported a broader pattern already emerging through other evidence. Neither side could prove its position conclusively, yet the damage was done. The possibility of secret correspondence immediately captured public imagination. By the end of the week, countless versions of the story circulated across London. Some claimed dozens of letters existed. Others claimed entire collections had been destroyed. Most of the rumors were probably false. That hardly mattered. Public opinion rarely waited for proof. As the trial continued, attention increasingly shifted toward Julian Hawthorne. His name now appeared openly in newspaper reports. Lawyers prepared to question witnesses regarding his relationship with Eleanor. And for the first time since the proceedings began, people started asking a question that reached beyond medical calculations. Not whether Eleanor had concealed the truth, but who the truth might lead to. The answer, if it emerged, threatened to destroy more than one reputation. Because somewhere behind the testimony, the rumors, and the legal arguments stood a man who might be the child's father. And before the court finished its work, London intended to learn his name. By the summer of 1875, the trial had grown far beyond the Ashcombe family. What had once been a private dispute between husband and wife now occupied newspaper columns across England. Reports from the courtroom appeared alongside political debates, foreign affairs, and financial news, a remarkable development that reflected just how fascinated the public had become with the case. People discussed it in gentlemen's clubs. They discussed it in railway carriages. They discussed it at dinner parties where guests often pretended to be shocked by the details while secretly hoping to hear more. The central question remained unchanged. If Sir Edward Ashcombe could not be the father, then who was? For months, that question had hovered over the proceedings without receiving a direct answer. Now the court was finally moving toward it. The first major turning point came when Julian Hawthorne was called to testify. The announcement alone created a sensation. Long before he entered the courtroom, spectators filled every available seat. Additional crowds gathered outside the building, waiting for newspaper vendors to publish updates from inside. Several reporters later wrote that the atmosphere resembled the opening day of a major criminal trial, rather than a civil dispute concerning legitimacy and inheritance. Julian arrived shortly before proceedings began. His appearance immediately attracted attention. Only a year earlier, he had been considered one of the most admired bachelors in London society. Wealthy, educated, and socially connected, he had moved comfortably through the highest circles without attracting serious controversy. Now he looked different. Not ruined, not broken, but visibly worn by months of scrutiny. The confidence that had once seemed effortless now appeared carefully maintained. As he took his seat, dozens of eyes followed him. Among them were Edward's and Eleanor's. The examination began with seemingly harmless questions. Julian was asked about his friendship with the Ashcombe family. He acknowledged knowing both husband and wife for many years. He described Edward as a respected officer. He described Eleanor as a close family friend. Nothing in his answers appeared unusual. The lawyers continued. How frequently had he visited the Ashcombe residence during Edward's absence? How often had he accompanied Eleanor to public events? How much time had they spent together? The answers remained measured and cautious. Julian admitted that he had offered companionship to a woman whose husband was serving overseas. London society, he argued, frequently operated in exactly that manner. Friends supported one another, escorts were provided for social events, families maintained connections while husbands served abroad. The explanation sounded reasonable, for a time. Then the questioning became more precise. A solicitor produced guest records from several private gatherings, letters confirming attendance, personal diaries belonging to hosts, household visitor logs. Individually, none of the documents proved anything. Together, however, they revealed a relationship that appeared increasingly difficult to describe as ordinary friendship. Julian and Eleanor had spent an extraordinary amount of time together, far more than most people had initially realized. The courtroom grew noticeably quieter as the evidence accumulated. Even those who favored Eleanor's defense struggled to ignore the pattern. The friendship had been unusually close. Whether it had crossed another boundary remained the question. The most damaging testimony arrived 2 days later. A former coachman employed by a neighboring family appeared before the court and described an evening that occurred nearly 2 years earlier. According to his account, he had been instructed to wait outside a country estate following a dinner party attended by both Eleanor and Julian. Most guests departed before midnight. The coachman claimed that Eleanor did not. Instead, he remained waiting for several hours while the household gradually emptied. When she finally emerged, the sky had already begun to lighten before dawn. The testimony immediately created controversy. The defense attacked the witness aggressively. Memories fade, dates become confused. Events are easily misremembered after several years. All of those arguments possessed some validity. Yet the witness remained remarkably consistent throughout questioning. More importantly, other evidence suggested that Eleanor and Julian had indeed remained at the estate long after most guests departed. The implications were impossible to ignore. Newspaper headlines the following morning were devastating. For the first time, many readers concluded that an affair had likely occurred. The remaining question concerned the child. The defense recognized the danger. If public opinion hardened completely against Eleanor, the outcome of the case could become almost impossible to reverse. They responded by placing Eleanor herself on the witness stand. The decision carried enormous risk. Victorian courtrooms could be merciless toward women accused of sexual misconduct. Every answer would be scrutinized. Every hesitation would be analyzed. Every contradiction would become tomorrow's headline. Yet Eleanor agreed. When she entered the witness box, the courtroom fell almost completely silent. Months of speculation had transformed her into one of the most discussed women in England. Now everyone wanted to hear her speak. At first, her testimony focused on her marriage. She described Edward's departure for India, the loneliness that followed, the uncertainty of waiting months for letters that sometimes never arrived, the isolation experienced by many military wives whose husbands served overseas for years at a time. The account resonated with many listeners. Several journalists later noted that she appeared sincere, even sympathetic. Then the questions turned toward Julian. For the first time since the trial began, Eleanor faced the issue directly. Yes, they had become close. Yes, they had spent considerable time together. Yes, she had trusted him deeply during a difficult period of her life. No, she insisted, their relationship had never become physical. The denial came clearly, without hesitation, without qualification, without retreat. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then the prosecution introduced a piece of evidence nobody outside the legal teams knew existed. A letter, not a love letter, not a confession, something potentially worse. The document had been discovered among the papers of a recently deceased solicitor who had once represented Julian in an unrelated matter. Nobody knew exactly how it arrived there, but its authenticity appeared difficult to challenge. The letter had been written by Eleanor, and while it never explicitly described an affair, it contained language that immediately captured the attention of everyone present. She wrote of loneliness, of dependence, of finding comfort in a person she had never expected to need. Most importantly, she referred to a single evening as the night that changed everything. The phrase appeared only once, yet it echoed throughout the courtroom. The defense objected repeatedly. The meaning remained ambiguous. Nothing in the letter proved adultery. Nothing proved paternity. Legally, that was true. Emotionally, the damage was catastrophic. For the first time, Eleanor appeared shaken. Truly shaken. Her composure, maintained throughout months of scandal, finally began to fracture. When questioned about the letter, she struggled to provide a convincing explanation. The uncertainty did not go unnoticed. Neither did Julian's reaction. Witnesses later described him as visibly distressed while the document was being read. Several reporters claimed he appeared close to intervening before his solicitor quietly stopped him. The moment became the defining image of the trial. Not because it proved guilt, because it suggested there was still something neither party wanted revealed. By the time proceedings ended that week, public opinion had shifted dramatically. The medical evidence remained powerful. The testimony regarding Julian remained troubling. Now the mysterious letter had added another layer of suspicion. For Edward, the situation became increasingly unbearable. Each day brought fresh details about a marriage he thought he understood. Each day revealed another possibility he wished had remained hidden. Yet despite everything, one question still lacked a definitive answer. The court had heard evidence suggesting an affair. The court had heard evidence challenging the child's legitimacy. But no witness had yet admitted the truth. No confession had been made. No final proof had emerged. That would change very soon. Because before the trial reached its conclusion, a piece of evidence hidden for nearly 2 years was about to appear. And when it did, it would leave neither Eleanor nor Julian any room to hide. The final weeks of the trial brought an atmosphere unlike anything London had experienced in years. By then, the proceedings had evolved far beyond a dispute over inheritance or legitimacy. The public had become emotionally invested in every development, following newspaper reports with an intensity usually reserved for political crises or major criminal cases. What began as a question about a child's parentage had transformed into a national fascination with betrayal, reputation, and the fragile nature of trust itself. For nearly a year, speculation had filled the gaps where certainty was missing. Now the court was approaching the moment when speculation would finally collide with evidence. The turning point arrived unexpectedly, not through a dramatic confession, not through a witness suddenly changing testimony, but through a box of personal papers discovered after the death of an elderly relative connected to Julian Hawthorne's family. Among ordinary correspondence, financial records, and legal documents, several letters were found sealed together with a ribbon that had not been disturbed for years. At first, nobody understood their significance. Then, one of the names was recognized: Edward Ashcombe. The documents were delivered to solicitors, examined carefully, and ultimately presented before the court. The courtroom was crowded beyond capacity on the morning the letters were introduced. Journalists filled every available space. Members of society who had followed the case for months arrived early in hopes of securing seats. Even individuals with no direct connection to the family seemed desperate to witness the conclusion of a scandal that had consumed so much public attention. The contents of the letters proved devastating. Unlike the previously disputed correspondence, these documents left little room for interpretation. They revealed an emotional intimacy that extended far beyond friendship. The language was deeply personal, affectionate, private. Written by two people who clearly shared a connection neither wished to discuss publicly. Yet the most damaging section appeared near the end of one particular letter. The document had been written shortly after the period when physicians believed conception had occurred. Within it, Eleanor expressed fear about consequences that might eventually follow a single mistake neither of them could undo. The wording remained indirect. Victorian correspondence rarely addressed intimate matters openly. Even so, the meaning appeared unmistakable. For the first time since the trial began, silence settled over the courtroom in a way that felt different from ordinary attention. People were no longer listening for scandal. They were listening for confirmation. The defense attempted to challenge the interpretation of the letters. Their lawyers argued that emotional attachment did not automatically prove adultery. Close friendships occasionally produced language that seemed romantic when viewed through the lens of suspicion. The argument might have succeeded months earlier. After everything already presented, it struggled to gain traction. The cumulative weight of the evidence had become overwhelming. Medical records, witness testimony, years of concealed correspondence, the unusually close relationship between Eleanor and Julian. Each piece alone might have been explained. Together, they formed a picture that grew increasingly difficult to deny. Yet the most extraordinary moment of the entire trial occurred later that afternoon. Julian Hawthorne requested permission to make a statement. The request surprised everyone. His legal representatives had spent months carefully limiting unnecessary risks. Voluntary statements rarely benefited witnesses involved in controversial proceedings. Nevertheless, Julian insisted. The judge allowed it. When he rose to speak, the room became completely silent. For several moments, he appeared unable to begin. The confident gentleman who once moved effortlessly through London's highest circles seemed to have disappeared. In his place stood a man exhausted by secrecy, a man who understood that every possible outcome now carried consequences. When he finally spoke, his voice remained calm. He acknowledged that his relationship with Eleanor had exceeded the boundaries of ordinary friendship. He admitted that deep feelings had developed between them during Edward's absence. He admitted that decisions had been made which both later regretted. The statement stopped short of a direct confession. Legally, it remained careful. But emotionally, the meaning was obvious. Nobody in the courtroom misunderstood what he was saying. Across the room, Eleanor lowered her eyes. For months, she had defended herself against accusations from newspapers, lawyers, physicians, and society itself. Now the man she had tried so desperately to protect was confirming the very suspicions she had spent a year denying. The realization seemed to drain the remaining strength from her. Observers later described the moment as heartbreaking, not because it ended the scandal, because it ended the illusion that the scandal might somehow disappear. Several days later, the court delivered its decision. The judgment focused heavily upon the medical evidence, which remained the foundation of the case from the beginning. The physicians had not claimed certainty beyond all doubt, but the court concluded that their findings were supported by a substantial body of additional evidence presented throughout the proceedings. As a result, the legitimacy of the child was formally challenged, and the court determined that Sir Edward Ashcombe could not reasonably be regarded as the biological father. The ruling sent shockwaves through society. Even in an era accustomed to public scandals, few cases had combined medicine, marriage, inheritance, and social status so dramatically. Newspapers across the country published extensive coverage. Editorials debated morality. Religious leaders delivered sermons about fidelity and temptation. Politicians referenced the case during discussions about family law. For months afterward, people continued discussing it. The legal consequences were severe. The child lost his position as heir to the Ashcombe estate. Future inheritance arrangements required revision. Financial settlements followed. Lawyers remained involved long after journalists moved on to newer stories. Yet the greatest consequences were not legal. They were personal. Edward emerged from the trial with his reputation largely intact, but victory brought surprisingly little satisfaction. He had pursued the truth and obtained it, yet the process had destroyed his marriage and shattered the future he once imagined for his family. Those who knew him afterward often remarked that he became quieter, more reserved, less trusting, not bitter, simply changed. Julian Hawthorne experienced an equally dramatic fall. Many former friends distanced themselves from him. Invitations disappeared. Business relationships became strained. The social world that had once welcomed him so easily gradually closed its doors. He remained wealthy. He remained respected in certain circles. but he never fully escaped the shadow of the trial. As for Eleanor, Victorian society proved far less forgiving. The newspapers eventually stopped printing her name. The crowds moved on. The gossip found new targets. Yet the consequences followed her long after public attention faded. A woman's reputation in 19th century England could take decades to build and only a single scandal to destroy. Eleanor learned that lesson more painfully than most. Years later, many people remembered the trial as a victory for science and evidence. Physicians had used medical observation to challenge a deception that might once have remained hidden forever. But those who lived through it remembered something else as well. They remembered how fragile certainty could be, how quickly love could become suspicion, and how a single secret, protected for years behind closed doors, could eventually unravel an entire life. Because in the end, the most remarkable thing about the Ashcombe scandal was not that the truth emerged. It was that everyone involved had spent so long believing they could keep it buried.